Man, Shadow of the Earth Tree. Where do I even start? Man, I love this DLC. I like the new areas, I love the dark yet beautiful aesthetic, and most importantly, I really enjoyed fighting the bosses, despite them giving me a good beating at times. It is safe to say that the DLC has the hardest bosses in Soulsborne history, but man, they are cool as hell to encounter, whether it's the weirdness of the dancing lion or the dark and gritty atmosphere of Messmer. When it comes on to pure visuals, these bosses outshines even the ones in the main game, but enough glazing because in this video I wanted to rank all the main bosses in the DLC from worst to best. Before I get into the list though, if you love Soulsborne content, be sure to subscribe, and if you don't want to do that, then hit the like button. But if you also don't want to do that, then that's also cool cause I don't know, man, I'm not your dad. Alright, let's get right into the list. At the very bottom, coming in at 13th place, we have Jori, the Elder Inquisitor. You might be wondering why I placed this guy on the list even though he's not a remembrance boss. Well, you see, while he might not have a remembrance, he technically guards a certain level leading up to the main boss of that area, so that's why I placed him on the list. Now, the boss fight itself is definitely annoying as hell to deal with. First of all, if you've seen any of my previous boss ranking videos, then you know how much I hate bosses that makes you have to deal with multiple enemies. But that's not even close to the worst part, as Jori himself spams holy attacks, whether it's the holy arcs or the tracking holy attack that can stun you. Now, there are a couple ways you can deal with the holy attacks. The best bet is to get some damage negation talisman, and trust me, throughout the whole DLC, these are going to be your best friend. In Jori's case, the best to get is the golden braid and the pearl drake talisman +3, as they both negate holy damage by the utmost. This will even help you out with a couple of the other bosses as well, especially the last one. Now, Jori's moveset, apart from those two attacks I've mentioned, consists of him summoning multiple enemies, but most of the enemies are simple to avoid, but the big guy can cause some issues at times. And the other thing Jori does is a teleport, which is just used to evade the player. All in all, this boss fight really sucks, but at least it's probably in the coolest area in the whole DLC. I also recommend you to be scadutree level 15 or above when facing him. Golden Hippo. Boy, where do I even start with this thing? This boss is honestly one of the worst bosses in FromSoft history, and that's because of his hitbox. For some reason, this thing can bend its head behind its ass and still hit you for some reason. I swear, it doesn't even matter how far behind him you are, his head will always clip through his whole body. Not only that, but he has an annoying grab attack that's so hard to read and requires perfect dodge timing to avoid. Another thing that's really annoying about this guy is the fact that he barely stays still. It's like he's always moving. And unfortunately, that's kind of a theme in the DLC where bosses do a crazy attack combo only for the window of attack opportunity to be almost non-existent. Now, don't get me wrong, the Hippo definitely has a larger attack window compared to some other bosses, but it's still just not a good boss fight. And plus, it looks stupid and goofy as hell. Like look at his teeth. Scadutree Avatar, the third boss of the Shadowkeep area. Plus, I'm most likely pronouncing Scadutree wrong. I used to just call it Scadutree. I don't know why, but whatever. Finding this boss was hard, as you have to drain the water from the Shadowkeep and go all the way down until you encounter this thing. First of all, let's talk about the aesthetics. Something I really love about the DLC is the aesthetics. Like, everything is just so dark and gritty yet colorful at the same time. Every area has its own unique look to it, and in my opinion, some of the areas even outshine some of the main game ones. And when looking at the Scadutree Avatar, it's literally just a spectacle, but in a dark, twisted way. First of all, the arena looks beautiful. It's literally at the base of the Scadutree. It looks like a golden, grungy swamp. The boss itself has an interesting design, as it's literally just an overgrown sentient sunflower that's dark and twisted. I went to this fight somewhat over leveled, as I had around 19 Scadutree fragments, and even then I can only imagine how hard this would have been on a lower level. I remember killing this guy thinking that this was an easy boss fight, only to realize that the health bar wasn't disappearing, only for it to suddenly revive itself with a whole new health bar, and it literally does this 3 times. Now, I don't know if it's reviving itself or there are just 3 of them, but this is why I compared them to the 4 kings on my first playthrough. Overall, I can see how this could be a super difficult fight on lower levels, but on a higher level it would be, it is somewhat easy. Commander Gaius, or Gaius, I am probably saying that wrong, but the Commander, or Hog Rider, friend of Messmer and possibly elder brother figure to Radahn. I don't know, I'm not a lore guy. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of my least favorite bosses in the DLC due to the amount of speed he has. First of all, if you're using Turret, then good luck because this man is faster than a Bugatti and he will catch up to Turret in no time. Not only that, but his boss fight is tough as hell since he barely gives you any breathing room to heal, which is a common trend for most of the DLC bosses. His attacks also hit very hard. Overall, it's just not a fun fight in my opinion. Putrescent Knight, or Percocet Knight as I called him on my first playthrough. I had such a weird time with this guy. While it seemed like I was doing good damage to him, he was also dealing a lot of damage to me. His attacks can catch you off guard and his reach is something that also surprised me many times. I swear you could be on the other side of the room and just from him shifting his body over, he will still manage to reach and attack you. And obviously that's an exaggeration, but it's still true that he has crazy range. Now the hardest part about the fight for me is when it comes on to dodging, his blue flame attacks. Apparently you have to jump over the fire, but my dumbass kept rolling and that was the main reason I kept dying to him. The other part of the fight that makes him super hard to deal with is the fact that he does not stay still at all. So I had to abuse the jump attack continuously. Overall, he has a great design and aesthetics, but in terms of everything else, he's just somewhat not that enjoyable, at least in my opinion. Metyr or metyr, mother of fingers. Jeez, these names, man. When I saw the fingers and sentient hands in Elden Ring for the first time, I always wondered where they came from. It's shown that this is what, is responsible for those said fingers. Visually, this is one of the best bosses in the DLC. I mean, the arena itself looks beautiful. It's like you're fighting her in the ocean underwater. The fight itself, despite having some cool attacks, is rather simple though. But I think I definitely came here a bit too over level as I easily killed her in less than 2 minutes. But overall, her design is cool and her aesthetics is what bumped her up this high. At number 7 we have Romina, Saint of the Bud. I'm glad FromSoft decided to give the Quaalude clones another shot after the disappointment that was Nazca, because unlike Nazca, this fine ass baddie is actually a good boss, especially visually. I mean, my favorite attack is when she flies up into the air and summons a bunch of butterflies. It's just beautiful. Now her attacks, while not super hard to dodge, can be a bit tricky to deal with, especially when she jumps into the air and does the spike slam. That requires like almost perfect dodge timing. The other thing that can make the fight more difficult is the fact that she can inflict Scarlet Rot, but other than that, she's a surprisingly easy boss and a good one at that. The only complaint I have is that she doesn't have any cutscenes, and I don't know, I think if she did, her boss fight would have felt more special considering the fact that she's literally, one of the required bosses in the DLC. At number 6 we have Promised Consort Radahn. Man, where do I even start? So unfortunately, I saw a leak that he was going to be in the DLC a couple days before it released, which made me even more excited because in my head I was like, damn, we're finally getting Prime Radahn after many people kept asking for it. Then after facing him, I have 2 major complaints. The first complaint is a bit nitpicky because I was a bit disappointed that he was the final boss. I wouldn't have had a problem if he was the third or second to last boss, but no, he's the final one. And this is not me saying that he's, he doesn't have final boss presence or aesthetics, because he definitely does, but the issue is that you can literally encounter him with only defeating 3 of the main bosses of the DLC, which makes encountering him feel, a bit anticlimactic, because as you begin the fight, you will know that you're not supposed to face him this early on, which means you need to go and explore, which technically meant I spoiled myself, but whatever. But maybe if I fought every boss then encountering him last, everything would have felt, different. But yeah. Now let's talk about the boss fight itself and why it only ranks at 6th place, despite him being the final one. You see, it's all because his second phase. I'm not gonna lie, his second phase is very unfair in my opinion, and I know a lot of people are gonna say that I should have leveled up my scadutree level or whatever, but on my first playthrough I had 19 out of the 20, which should be good enough to face him, and on my second I had the full 20 blessings. But even with that high amount of scadutree blessings, his second phase felt unnecessarily hard. He feels like you're fighting one of the bullshit modded boss fights that's just hard for the sake of being hard. His first phase is amazing though, don't get me wrong, it reminds me of Godfrey a little bit, which is fitting for Radahn's character because he looks up to Godfrey. His sword swings will sometimes catch you off guard, but even then you can still dodge most of the attacks. His sword swings will sometimes catch you off guard, but even then you can still dodge them pretty easily with the right timing. However, all the fun and fairness gets thrown out in the second phase, as now Michaela starts to powering him up with holy magic and Radahn becomes super, OP and powerful. To be honest, to be fair though, his holy attacks can be negated by the Pearl Drake Talisman and the Golden Braid, but even with those equipped, getting hit by the holy attacks can stun you into getting comboed to death. And let's not forget the blinding visuals of the holy attacks. Again, sure, it's a visual spectacle, but at the same time I realized that I couldn't see half of the shit Radahn was doing because every attack he does is followed up by, some blinding holy lights. And even that aside, he still has some attacks that feels unavoidable and straight up bullshit. I remember the DLC was getting review bombed due to the difficulty of the bosses, and some people, mostly YouTubers, were saying that it's a skill issue or that the people complaining don't have enough scadutree levels for the fights. And while I agree that most of the reviews are from people who were, probably just rushing or didn't even, get the required scadutree level for a certain fight and then making complaints about it, I still think that some of the criticisms are, valid. Mostly the ones about Radahn. You can't tell me that the second phase of this fight is super balanced and fair. I saw a YouTuber point out that the DLC is encouraging people to test out new builds and playstyles, and if you don't, you're gonna get punished for it, and he was saying that in order to beat the final boss, you have to change your playstyle and build. Now, he wasn't necessarily pushing the criticisms of the DLC aside, but I disagree with that mindset because as much as I am FromSoft Soulsborne Glazer, I don't think changing your whole build is something that even them encourages the player to do, because I mean, if they did, then we would have unlimited resources of larval tears and an infinite source of somber and regular ancient smithing stones. You can't tell me that the final boss of the game is balanced, because, he's not. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on Radahn, but I don't know if he's going to get patched, but if he does, then I'm pretty sure this boss fight would have definitely, would definitely be higher. At number 5, we have Bayle the Dread. A lot of people are already starting to say that Bayle is now the best dragon fight in the entire Soulsborne history, and I feel like we say that with every new dragon fight, but I don't think that's a bad thing though. From a spectacle and visual perspective, I think he is, because the build up to him is insane, and after hearing that he fought Plasugisax, it made me want to fight him even more, knowing that he's the reason why the Dragon Lord lost 2 of its head. Now, I definitely recommend using a summon for this fight, whether it's Igon or just any other Spirit Ash, because Bayle does not stop moving at all, and that's the most annoying part about fighting him. He's also super tanky as well, but at least he doesn't feel, unnecessarily difficult like Radahn. Overall, it's a dragon fight, and even though I'm not too big on them, they're still pretty cool, and Bayle is cool as hell too, so yeah. Divine Beast Dancing Lion. This boss was shown a lot in the trailers, and even though it was the first boss of the DLC, it was really fun. The camera can be quite an issue at times, and most of its attacks are genuinely hard to read, but for some reason I was able to kill it on my first ever attempt. Now, the design of the boss is cool, and also the spectacle side of it. I mean, it feels like you're fighting the Avatar because bro got master over all the elements. All in all, it's genuinely one of my favorite fights in the DLC, and that's why it ranks at number 4. Rellana. Man, this boss is crazy hard, especially considering the fact that she's the second main one in the DLC. On my first playthrough, I literally had to give up soloing her and use the mimic tier, which made the fight a lot easier. Now on my second and third playthrough, fighting her was a bit easier, and that's because I actually knew where to get the scadutree fragments, and I managed to plus 10 the fragments before facing her. On my first playthrough, I think I only faced her while being at level 5 or 6. That aside, she feels like a Devil May Cry boss that got placed in the Elden Ring due to her speed and agility. She does a lot of combos while giving you a small window of attack opportunity, and staggering her is almost like non-existent. She barely staggers at all. At least you could stagger Melania, but her can't even do it. Now her second phase is when she turns into Pontiff Solivan, as one of her blades engulfs in flames while the other one engulfs in magic. This phase is really tough as the elemental damage you take from her is insane, so it's best to stack up on some good magic defense talisman. In this phase, she has another move where she can summon 3 moon attacks that can annihilate your health bar if you don't jump over them. Some people call this move the backshots of doom, which is funny, I ain't gonna real life. Her visuals is what I love the most about her, because for some reason she reminds me of the penetrator, and I don't know why, but maybe it's the armor. But yeah, despite her difficulty and fast attack combos, she's low-key one of the best bosses in the DLC. At number 2 we have Midra, the Lord of Frenzied Flame. Before I get into this boss fight, let's talk about the build up. I can't be the only one that was creeped out by the Abyssal Woods. I mean, it was so creepy to the point where a turret couldn't even be summoned. That's not even the bad part. This whole level felt like a horror game, especially when it comes on to the spooky enemies that you can't even fight. You literally had to sneak around them to avoid getting caught, because once they catch you, it's literally game over. That's how you make something scary. There's no need for jump scares or any gimmicks. Just knowing that your character is gonna get one-shotted by an enemy is scary enough. Now, after making your way through the forest, you encounter a manor, and the boss of this manor is Midra, the guy we saw from the trailer. Now, judging by the trailer, we could already tell that he was going to use the sword that was stabbed through his head, so when I fought him, I was kind of shocked that he was just a regular enemy, at least up until the cutscene plays out, and he turns out to be the Lord of Frenzied Flame, which is mind-blowing, like no pun intended. The visuals of this fight is magnificent. The flowing robe, the glowing head, and the fiery frenzied flame really makes this boss a spectacle to behold. Now, the only complaint I have about this fight is that it didn't really have a true first phase. If it had an amazing first phase, then this guy would have been at number 1 for sure. And finally, at number 1, we have Messmer the Impaler.
Death in the embrace of Messmer's flame. In the embrace of Messmer's flame. In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
Trust me, you're gonna remember that dialogue even in your sleep. Given that he was the poster boy for the DLC, it's no surprise that he was the best boss quality wise. His presence is really fantastic and his design is cool as hell. And sure, while he does feel like a Devil May Cry boss with the amount of unforgiving combos he can pull off, with the proper timing and patience he can defeat him for sure. Now his second phase is the trickiest, as the snakes he summons can throw you off with their delayed attacks. Like, I've died to those snakes more time than I would like to admit. The only complaint I had is the fact that he barely gives the player any window to attack, and his attacks are way too fast at times, especially when he summons the 3 snakes. He almost does it instantaneously, giving you no time to dodge or run. But all that aside, his voice acting was great and the visual aesthetics of the fight is really good as well, and that's why I placed him at the number 1 spot. Now, that was it for the ranking, but I just wanted to say something before the video end. At the time of making this video, there hasn't been any patches or nerfs as yet, so some of the things I said about the bosses might change over time. Prime Radahn, if nerfed, would probably, overtake Messmer as my favorite boss fight. But at the moment, his ass should stay at 6th place. But all that aside, despite some criticism I made about the bosses, I genuinely love the DLC and I wished it was longer. Not saying that it's short, but it's just that I enjoyed it so much that I wanted more content. I want to make an in-depth video going over everything the DLC had to offer, not necessarily reviewing it, but more of me doing a video essay on why I love it. But that could take a while. But in the meantime, if you like videos like this, then hit the like button, because it would definitely help me out a lot. I hope you guys enjoyed this video.